All right. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to American Vindicta. We have on with us my friend Brent Height. Brent is the team leader. He is the originator of the Paleo Research Group. He's an Arkansas explorer. And we're going to talk about caves. We're going to talk about some of the burial mounds, the mound builder people. We're going to talk about giants and also some paranormal stuff. So, Brent, thanks for coming on with us. And let's get right started, man. Where do you want to hit up first?
Well, I guess we could start out by saying that we have a upcoming project that we're going to be working with L.A. Marzulli, Timothy Alvarino, and a few others, Mondo Gonzalez, and it's concerning some earthworks here in central United States. And we can't say a whole lot about it at this point, but just stay tuned because we're going to have some stuff coming up about it in a few weeks here. So. But we can talk about what kind of work we do when we're out in the field, and we could start out talking about some mounds and caves and some lore about giants, maybe.
Yeah, so whenever we go up to Arkansas, we like to do caving. Now, just real quick, what's the difference for people between spelunking and caving?
Well, the way I like to look at it is spelunking are speleologists that have a degree in geology and they study caves. So what we do is more hardcore, really. We're the explorers that go into new caverns. Um, we try to find virgin caves, explore them. It's dangerous
And
sometimes. Go
what's a
ahead.
virgin cave for people who don't know?
Okay, a virgin cave would be a cave that nobody's been in before. Um, it would be an untapped cavern that hasn't had human footprints in it before, and those are those are rare. They're becoming more rare, but a lot of times you can find them by walking in a creek bank. And if you're in a certain area, you can walk in the creek bank and you can feel along the bank, and underneath some of the overhang rocks, you might feel airflow, and that would be an indication that there's a cavern there, and you could dig your way into a cavern and explore it. Um, so that
Which
would
is
be
which is dangerous.
yeah, that would be yeah, you got to have some knowledge about this because you could have a cave in right at the entrance, you know. But that would be considered a virgin cave, something that you tunnel into yourself for the first time, and there's a few of them up here.
Yeah, one of the things that we used out there in Cave One, I'll let Brent talk about this, but it's the first cave system that we explored together as a research group. And it's also on the video of exploring Arkansas caves. I think it's listed as Cave One. And like I said, I'll let you talk about the details of that. But we were using a FLIR, a thermal camera, to try and find cold spots along the outside of these two cave entrances to try and find another entrance that we would have to remove debris and rock from. And we actually found it. You found the one that had a lot of airflow. It was blowing out. And there's another thing in there, blowing caves. You want to explain to people what a blowing cave is?
Well, it's just there's several caves named that, and that's because there's airflow that comes out of the cave, which indicates that there is an exit or an entry point on another side of the mountain or somewhere else in the cavity. So, um, if there's a saying among cavers, you know, if you go to the back of the cave and it looks like it ends, but you can see some cracks and crevices, there's a saying among cavers, and they say if it blows, it goes. That means if you feel airflow, then you can keep going potentially. There's an exit on the other side.
So with all this that we've been doing, I mean, there's so many caves just within the Arkansas area. Um, do you ever think that there's a correlation for the Native American people and the giant lore within the caves? Because in South America, there is lore that me and you are aware of where they were doing ancestral worship and they were taking the bones of the giants and moving them into the caves, sometimes at very hard locations to get to.
Right.
Why would they do that?
Well, all throughout history, even going back into the Genesis account in the Bible, caves have been used as burial chambers. So, um, some of these people, let's say the giants that you mentioned, some of these people actually tribal leaders or kings or governors over nations or whatever. So they were they were thought as like we would think of our president, somebody of honor. So they would have a specific cave they would bury their tribal leaders in. This is traditionally caves have been a burial place and also a place of shelter. Some cave systems were just a place of shelter, like the one we visited in Oklahoma. And some places, some caves were for burial purposes.
Let's get on to cave one, because we're going to be going back there within probably the next 13 to 14 days. Cave one is interesting. It's historical. There's a reason why we're not giving you the description of it, and it's because we want the least amount of risk from vandalism as possible. We have found some very old items in this cave, possible human remains. There was the lore of two giants that were in there, and down the road, following the creek in this area, there's more lore of caves with petroglyphs and of giants and mass graves of human remains, which, especially in cave one, led us to believe that it was possibly cannibalistic. So let's start from there and evolve the conversation.
Okay, so the reason why we went into cave one to begin with is because of the lore that was associated with it, and some newspaper articles we were able to dig up from the 30s. But the newspaper articles and local people telling us stories about a 7'4" skeleton that was taken out of the cave back in the 30s. It was a female. She was in a sitting position actually when she was buried, which is typical. I don't know exactly the reason why, but a lot of times you find that the female, um, maybe she was some type of leader or the wife of a leader, but oftentimes she'll be in a sitting position when she's buried. There was also other skeletons that were found actually later on in the 70s. A university actually came in and did a minor survey of this same cave, and they mapped the cave, but there's a chamber in the cave that got overlooked, and we were able to see and enter this chamber while we're there. One of the things that's significant about this place is one of the most sought after artifacts among collectors is called a Calf Creek point, which Calf Creek runs through this area, and there's several caves on this creek bank system. This Calf Creek is a minor tributary to one of the major rivers in Arkansas. It's in a place where there's lots of limestone. So there's lots of caverns and stalactites and stalagmites. Your limestone is what gives you your formation in the caverns. So we went there. We had a local person that acted as a guide for us there. He's been studying that cave for 30 years, and other places. And so when we got there, we go in, we do the initial survey. We had Mondo Gonzalez with us, who's an archaeologist, and we actually found a Calf Creek point while we were in there.
Holy Toledo.
Right there.
Let me see
He's
that.
sitting there under the Pepsi
That is a
can.
Calf Creek
Somebody
point,
dug
dude.
it out from underneath there, and
That is
the water's
crazy.
washed it off.
How now?
I missed that years ago.
Explain to people, how rare is this?
Oh, that's
What is that point worth?
once in a lifetime. This is.
Is it really?
Oh yeah.
I've been a surface find artifact collector all my life, and I have a piece of one. I've never actually found a whole one, and we found one that day that we were in there.
Minutes of being in there.
It's extremely rare.
Yeah, and I mean, we talk about providence. I mean, we were just barely in there and looking around, And man, right there at Mondo's feet when Billy found it, he's like, holy. And
Yeah.
I mean, you know, for someone to be doing it for as long as Billy has, and then also as long as you have, to be that to see just how excited you were about this, you know, what to me is just an arrowhead.
Mhm.
And then understanding the significance and how old it was. How old did we speculate that one was?
Well, Billy seemed to think that it was at least 1,500 years old. It could be older than that. I would say probably from 2,000 to 1,500.
Yeah, that's incredible. 2000 to 1500 years ago. Would
Mhm.
that put the giants of Native American lore in that time frame?
It could. You know, there's different periods throughout history where giants are discussed in biblical texts and other historical documents. So even the Bible itself tells us there were giants in the earth in those days and also after that. And that's in the Genesis 6 account. And it's referring to, when it says and also after that, it's referring to before the flood and after the flood. And there's some controversy about how these things reappeared. When I say these things, I'm talking about the giants, or what is the Bible calls Nephilim. These things appeared after the flood somehow. There's speculation on as to how, but you know, the fact is that we have other documents from explorers that came over here, Magellan, De Soto, and their documents say they encountered people that were 7, 8, 9 feet tall.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about this is, you know, there have been tall people historically throughout all of mankind. But we're not talking about, you know, your average tall NBA person. We're
Right.
talking about a person that is between the stature of 7 foot tall or taller, that are equally built and powerful and agile, and for an unknown reason, very intelligent, who
Right.
have a metallurgy skill and architectural knowledge that we don't know, or at least man didn't know at that point in time. And so, you know, one of the things that people speculate, and I'm right there with them, is half the things that we see that are built within America, all the stone walls that we've seen, you know, the large mounds. I mean, one of the mounds that we were out there, the Toltec, one of them was over 80 feet tall, and probably in its heyday was taller, and they're all lined astronomically. So, you know, why would the Giants know this type of stuff?
Well,
That's a question that I ask.
that's that, like I say, people have different beliefs about the Genesis 6 account, and that what it states is there were giants in the earth in those days and also after that. Like I said, it starts out when the sons of God looked upon the daughters of men and saw that they were fair, and they took for themselves wives, and they bore children unto them. And these children were the mighty men, the men of renown, the men of old. So if you interpret that, you can go through the Bible, and you can pull up your strong concordance and other documents that help you translate from Hebrew to English. And the phrase "sons of God" is in the Hebrew "Bnei Elohim," and every time elsewhere in the Bible that phrase is used, it's referring to angels. The reason is, back in about the 3rd century, there was a bishop, a Catholic bishop, I believe, that didn't like the story and made a change in the document to say that these were the sons of Seth. So the sons of Seth theory was born, and then in the 5th century, it was widely adopted. So, but if you go back to what the 1st century Christians believe, when Jude wrote in his book, some of the statements that he made, he understood that his audience knew the Genesis 6 sons of God as being angels. And 2nd Peter states that. It talks about the angels that sin. So somewhere between the time that the New Testament was completed and modern times, the story has been twisted to have a different meaning than what it was originally written as. So going back to how do they know this stuff? How do they have this knowledge? And according to the way Genesis 6 reads, there's an angelic factor. We have a hybrid here. We have angels mating with humans. And so naturally, these angels were in the realm of God at one time. They're going to have more knowledge than we do. These are fallen angels. That was their sin, and that's why they fell. So you've got the angelic factor in here that gives them more knowledge, but there's been knowledge that's been seeping out over time through different people or different avenues, and we've come to a point in time to where we have computers and we have iPhones, we have cell phones, we have different technology. We started out with the wheel, but I think all of this was before and another time, as Ecclesiastes stated. I think prior to the flood, they were just as technologically advanced, and it's because of this angel presence that was here. And that's why we have structures like the pyramids and like the stone walls and different structures in Peru.
It's interesting how throughout antiquity these structures have all survived. They all have a similar method of construction, large hewn stones. And then there's a human element there that I believe that human element was either slave class that was worshiping the giants, or at some point in time were building these things in homage to them and to the gods. Why would you think that with all these things happening throughout Europe, the Middle East, and China, I mean, all throughout Asia, we're seeing these types of structures.
Mm-hmm.
How did it get from the Levant to North America to where now we're exploring them and asking the question, what is this? How did it get here?
Well, I think, we would call it migration, but it seems as if, this technology starts down in Egypt. And so you've got the pyramids there. It's not the only place where you find pyramids. There's pyramids throughout Asia. There's pyramids. There's even been stone pyramids, a few found here in North America. Some of them have been destroyed. But anyway, it starts in Egypt, and then it moves up through the Levant, through what is now Israel. These people migrate further north. I think the conquest of Canaan had something to do with pushing this technology north. So when the Israelites go into the promised land, they fight these wars against the inhabitants of the land there, and they drive a lot of these people northward. Matter of fact, there's a scripture that talks about a certain battle, and it says some went to the north, some went to the south, and some went across the Great Sea. What is the Great Sea? Could it be the Atlantic Ocean? So then you have Stonehenge and places like that in England. So it travels up that far north, and then you have the story about the volcanic eruption that took place back somewhere between the 5th and the 9th century, covered England in ash. England became uninhabitable, and the people fled to a different place, and some of them ended up going across the ocean to what is now North America. So it was a series of events. It's more of a push, series of events that take place that spreads this, spreads these people that have this knowledge. So it pushes them into different geographical locations. And so that's why you find structures in different parts of the world that are like structures and using the same kind of knowledge, but they're in different parts of the world. And you say, well, how did people communicate back then? Well, they migrated, and they took this knowledge with them when they left.
Well, I mean, and this is head knowledge. This is well practiced head knowledge to be able to, use these types of angles that are used, like with the step pyramids.
Mm-hmm.
It's not Lego blocks. I mean, there's real math that goes into this. And I think it's interesting whenever you look at the pyramids in Egypt to these step pyramids that you find more or less all around the world, because if I'm correct, the pyramids in Egypt are really kind of a one of a kind type of thing, right? Everything
Yeah,
else is more or less a step pyramid.
yeah. Well, another word for a step pyramid is a ziggurat. And those are older. When you find those are usually older, which I've showed you pictures before of what I think may be one in north central Arkansas, and it's just covered up with trees and dirt and stuff, and we don't recognize it anymore. But the older structures were the step pyramids, and they were built on a certain angle. The pyramid was a certain angle, so you find a lot of those on the east side of the Nile. When you get over on the west side of the Nile, their pyramids are a little bit more advanced. That would be on the Giza Plateau, and they're a different angle. And the reason why the angle changed is because when you look at some of these older step pyramids, a lot of them have started to crumble and implode. And so if you build it on a certain inclination, then it will have structural integrity, and it won't implode on itself. And there was some experimentation, it looks like, that took place until they found the right angle. And then it seems like this 51.8 degrees shows up, like the Pyramid of Giza. You can get 51.8 degrees out of it when you measure the angle. And then you find that at Stonehenge. And then when we were Mondo and I were and LA was up in Ohio, and we were at the Octagon Mound and the Great Circle Mound. It's kind of a combined site. It's a site that's about a mile long, and there's you can draw a line through certain portions of that site and come up with 51.8 degrees, and that's not by coincidence, I don't think.
And another thing that's really interesting, which is kind of where the caves and caverns fall in, is that in my travels around the world, and I've been in a few places with Tim in Peru.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these ziggurats, these temples, from the Inca to the Mayan, and then obviously across the water into the Levant area, there's an interesting thing where there seems to be chambers within inside these structures, and then there's a underground cavern of some sort in almost every single one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that in the Levant area, it's like that. It's the same thing in Asia. It's the same thing like that up in northern part of Europe. Travel across the water now from South America and up into Central America, because the latest thing that I've been studying is the Mayan culture, and they too are very big into pyramids and caves.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're in an area that we've been investigating that has caves and numerous mountains that, I mean,
Or
when you
pyramid
look
shape.
at them, they're all pyramid. Look, I've been all around the world. I've
Mhm.
seen from the Andes Mountains. I've seen mountains all across the world. I've never seen a mountain that looks like a pyramid. I haven't seen that yet. I'm not saying it's not there, but out in Hill Country, Texas, where I'm at, we have these short mountains, and they're all look like the top has all been shaved off of them, but nothing is like this perfect pyramidal structure. So within this area, it almost makes me feel like this was the area to build these megalithic structures, because they're building it on top of caverns. They're building it on top of caves. And the
Mhm.
Mayan culture, something I was sharing recently with you and Mondo, is that in the Mayan culture, some of their lore, for you to travel down to where the dead are,
The underworld.
the underworld.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's you go into a cave, you go into a pyramid, you go into a cave, and from there you got to go underwater, and it leads you to another passage that is all caves, all cavernous.
Right.
And there's a guy he's a Mexican explorer, and he was finding young children from the ages of infants to teenagers that were part of sacrificial worshiping,
Mhm.
and they're sprinkled throughout these caves. So what that tells us is that at some point in time, water is evacuated from the cave, and that's when they go and they place these bodies in there, and then water rises and obviously picks up the carcass and moves it at some point in time. But I mean, some of these caves are, man, they're deep. I mean, they're very, very deep, and most of them are not explored. Like, if I'm correct, 90% of them are not explored, and we have no idea what's down there. And I don't think it's a far stretch, Brent, for us to say that the Inca culture, the Mayan culture, push up north at some point in time and either met with, married, and mingled with the Native American culture, or it's all the same thing. We
Right.
just may have a few different races of people, but it's all very, very similar. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a very good possibility. I want to go back a little bit to what we were discussing earlier when we talked about the step pyramids, and I said that they were older. And when you get over to South America, there's a different story going on there. I believe there are later period of pyramids, uh, later than Giza probably. And two examples would be Chichen Itza. It's a step pyramid type. It's the one that has the the serpent that appears on it at a certain time of year when the sun hits it. And then another place in Mexico would be Teotihuacan. Those are step pyramid types, but I believe they are a later version of step pyramid. Um, so I wanted to bring that up, and I'm sure when you were in Peru that you've seen smaller stonework on top of larger stonework, which indicates that somebody of less stature, less knowledge, reconstructed on top of something that was partially there. And um, so you got a culture that's recognizing a spot that was a what would you call it, a ritualistic spot to some race at some point, and then later on these other people stumble onto it and they pick up on the practice and they rebuild it, but it's with smaller stones. Now, to get
Yeah,
back to your question, do I think that these people from South America pushed up into North or commingled or whatever? I think you have a combination of things. I think that's true, uh, and in some places, especially throughout Central America, up through the Mississippi River Valley, there wasn't ample amount of stone to build with, and in some cases, that's where these earthworks pop up, and the earthworks are representing the same thing. You got a religious element here, component,
every
and
bit of it is religious.
so you talked about the sacrificial um, element that's going on in South America, even here in the Ozarks, and in the Mississippi and Ohio River valleys. We have places where there's sacrifice stones, is what I call them. They're altars, basically. As a matter of fact, I have a meeting set up for you and I and a gentleman here locally where I am, and we're going to go visit a place where there is one of these ritual altars, and it has a blood groove in it, and the groove is carved into the stone, and it goes over the edge of the stone and down into the ground. And this guy's even taken post hole diggers, and he's dug down a few feet, and this groove's still going down the side of this rock. And so I had a gentleman reach out to me from Missouri that had an explanation for that, and he said that's a blood groove, and he said this culture in their religious practices, um, they believe that they need to appease the gods of the underworld, they need to sacrifice someone and let the blood flow down into the earth, and they call it feeding the earth. So that's one of the religious components that's involved in this whole thing. This whole thing is basically worship to a foreign god.
Did the Egyptians do something similar? I know they fed people to crocodiles.
Yeah,
I know that part,
right.
which is horrific when you see the imagery of that. It's horrific. Actually, when I was in Iraq, there was a guy who was an interpreter for us. He was from Egypt, and he actually like kind of gave us a backstory on that type of stuff. And that's horrific, throwing people to crocodiles. I mean, live, like that's not a way to go. But I think there's an interesting point here where with every structure that's like this pyramidal structure, there seems to be sacrifice. Every single one of them. So automatically it's religious. And they're sacrificing to who and to what, right?
Right.
In North America, we know that they were doing that. And I just think there's a link somewhere from North America to South America.
And it's interesting that you brought up the story about the alligator, the Egyptians, feeding people to alligators, because in Ohio, there's a mound structure called the Alligator Mound. And I was up there with L.A. Marzulli and Mondo Gonzalez, and we looked up some old documents, and we found out that in the center of this is an effigy mound. It's shaped like an alligator. Okay. And so when we got up there and started trying to put some pieces together, Mondo and I took a compass, and we found out that certain legs and the head was pointing toward a certain direction to the, I forget if it was summer solstice, and the tail points towards something, and then the right leg points to Polaris. I mean, this is not just somebody going out there making an effigy mound just to look like the shape of something. They're actually pointing to different things in the sky, things astronomical, things in the sky. So, but there is a sacrifice stone in the center of that mound, which I believe this sacrifice ritual took place right there at the Alligator Mound. And that you reminded me that when you talked about the Egyptians feeding people to alligators.
Do you think that was the original mound builder people that were doing that? Because there's a difference.
Yeah.
If people don't know about the mound builders and the Native Americans.
Right. The world tells us that the Native Americans did this, but as you and I know, we have Native Americans on our team, and their lore tells them that there was a race of people here before they were here, and they were the original mound builders. Now, the Native Americans picked up on some of the practices, just like we talked about earlier. Whatever race built the giant megalithic stones down in Peru, when the Incas and the Mayans come along later, they build on top of it. All right, so now you've got a race of people that's building these giant earthworks that are lined up on astronomical bodies in the sky. And then I've talked to one Native American who talked about the Great Dying, and it was a plague that swept through North America, and it killed out this race. And they described this race as being European in nature, but it didn't affect the Native Americans, the Indians, what we would call Indians. It didn't affect them, but it wiped out this other race. And so then you got the Native Americans, and there's like, well, these people were doing this, and that makes sense. They built a small mound to put their dwelling on, so we could do that. And they buried their dead over here in this mound, so we could do that. And so sometimes when you find these mound sites, you'll have layers of people buried in the mounds if they're a burial mound. There's different mounds for different reasons. You've got mounds that worship centers were built on top of. You've got mounds that were dwelling mounds, which were simply put there to rise their dwelling up above the floodplain. And then you have burial mounds, and you have burial caves. But in the mounds, a lot of times larger statured people will be at the bottom of the mound, and then you'll find more normal size people, what we call normal size, in the upper layers of the mound. So that shows you that an older race of people buried their dead here, and then this other race come in and they said, okay, that's where they buried their dead, we'll bury our dead here.
Which is one of the reasons why we want to excavate. There's over 100,000 mounds documented, at least, and there are new ones that are being found. The YouTuber Dutch Sense, he recently found some effigy mounds up in what was it?
Missouri.
No, Idaho.
In
Idaho. So I mean, these are all over, and obviously they're older, and it's if we're lucky, because what is it? Only 20,000 mounds have actually been excavated.
Yeah.
so, we got a decent chance of finding something that is deeper underneath this. And, one of the problems right here, we'll if Mondo was here, Mondo could take over. One of the problems that Mondo has is with the Smithsonian and the cover-up. He's actually writing a book over the cover-up. And for us, I think, the reason why it's pertinent for us to excavate some of these mounds is to see what culture is actually there and why we're not being told about this culture. Why do we keep getting fed this BS story from these quote experts? And yet, like our friend Billy, whenever they went into cave 1 and they excavated part of it, Billy said, man, they came in here, they moved some rocks around, they took some diagrams of a little bit. He said, but they didn't explore 3/4 of this cave and excavate it. He said, I've done more and found more in this one cave than they said was ever here. So obviously, and these are, state archaeologists. So obviously right there at the beginning, we have a problem. Either the state archaeological groups are not telling us what they're finding. And why would they not tell us? Or they're not giving the actual due diligence to these areas. And so that's one of the reasons why now when we find some of these hotbed places, we don't talk about them. We definitely don't give out the location of them because we don't want it to be tampered with, right? That's one of the fears. Like if we find something, the government's going to come in and seize it and take it all.
Right. And it has become less and less intense with the government seizing property. They almost don't even care anymore, but that was the case in the past. But there's several factors involved in why the cover up. I think in more recent times, as we've discussed in other podcasts with Mondo, about 1860 there was a shift. And there was a new paradigm that was pushed on the people, and it was part of Darwinism. It was part of, the Darwinian paradigm. And they had to cover up some things in order to tell their story the way they wanted it told. And this is rooted in just the disbelief of the Bible, basically. But I think it goes further back than that. And this is my opinion. And as you know, I'm biblical based. But before the flood, if you believe the biblical narrative, Satan came up with a plan, and he was able to basically get the whole world except for 8 people. Only 8 people were spared. That plan must have been so great that he's wanting to use it again. But if we knew the real story, then we would know what his plan was. So I think over time, the story has been covered up, and we had to forget what happened back then, so when it happens again, we won't realize it's happening. Because even Jesus said, will I find any faithful when I return? So there's the Bible tells us broad is the path that leads to destruction, and narrow the path that leads to righteousness, and few there be that find it. And so the reason why few people are going to find this path is because it's been covered up. It's rooted in the work of Satan. But then men have taken over, and they've put their belief systems into place, which are contrary to what the Bible says, and I'm speaking of Darwinism, just as one example. There's been others.
I've read a lot of books, from the late 1800s, and it poses a lot of questions and a lot of problems. They're dry books for one thing, so you really have to have a want to learn this type of stuff. But it seems to be that a lot of it, because we have the chasing of the dinosaur bones, that race from like the 1850s and on to find dinosaurs, right? And there's a lot of times where it seems like an explorer would find a giant skull or giant leg bones, or a giant skeleton, and then here comes the Smithsonian. It's nope, it's a mammoth, it's a dinosaur, it's nothing giant,
right?
None of it's giant. And then there's like an explosion at one point in time of we found a giant here, we found a giant here, we found a giant here. And as you and I know, I have at least 80 different articles from newspapers talking about people finding giants. And the problem is, like, did you actually find a giant, or is it a mistaken identity? Or did you find a giant and then it was covered up and you were told, our bad. This is actually just a prehistoric creature. And I think, and one of the things that we've talked to L.A. Marzulli about this, and I think it's a very good point that L.A. made, and it's fantastical to even have to say this, but that you have experts who will say, well, their way of taking measurements, doctors of taking measurements back then, may be different than ours now. Here's a measurement device. Go from the foot bone to the head, and you get your measurement. Like, none of this has changed. How are the measurements different? And yet we've built all these structures for, hundreds and hundreds of years. Where did it go different? And Catalina Island, that's another good one that LA brought up with the giant that's buried there. And you have experts who say, oh no, that's an average sized man. Then LA actually showed, no, it's about a 9-foot skeleton, which is abnormal. It's
Right.
not normal at all to have anything that size. I mean, occasionally you'll get someone 8 foot. I think right now around the world, I was looking the other day, like, I think there's like 50 documented people around the world who are over 8 foot tall. And you know what? Every single one of them have to walk? A cane.
Right.
Like they're
And see, that's the
deformed.
difference. See that what's happening with these people are weak and frail because this is just a overstimulation of a gland. I'm talking
we're
about the
not
modern
talking
day
about
people.
Yeah, we're not talking about like giant,
Right.
biblically, like Goliath and his brothers, the
Right.
ones that the people of antiquity warred against. Like you said, they have a gland problem.
Yeah, that's the difference. And so this overactive gland is what causes them to grow to this height. But when we read in historical documents and biblical texts about giants, these people were strong. They were proportionate. They were they were agile. So they weren't weak. They didn't need a cane. And so we're talking about two different things here. One of them is just a genetic anomaly, and then the other one is a different creature altogether. So I want to go back to what you said about reading older books. We failed to mention the first time you and I got together, we went to a cave that we call the IRC cave, and it was actually an old history book that led me to that cave. It was I think it was a history book from the 30s or 40s that I found in a local library, and it was written on a 6th grade education level. So it was kind of geared towards young children. But it told the story about that there were mummies taken from this cave. It tells how they were wrapped. It tells that their skulls were different than ours. They had larger jawbones and possibly elongated skulls. And so when I read that, I was like, hey, wait a second. And so I started doing some research on this, and I found some documents that said that there was a geology teacher actually that went in with his students. He was a geology professor, and they are the ones that excavated this cave and took these skeletons out of it. So this cave had a site number associated with it. And I was like, hey, I wonder if I can find some artifacts that are associated with this site number, which led me to University of Arkansas, which we visited and got to see some of the artifacts there, and found out that the elongated skulls are actually still there. They're there in the University of Arkansas artifact storage vault. And we were able to get access to that, but they will not let us see the skulls. And so there's a reason why. They say these belong to tribal people. We have to get permission from the tribe in order to view the human remains. And but is that the real reason why they don't want us to see this, or do they not want this stuff studied? Is this part of the cover up? I mean, what's going on here?
And the person that's on our team that's Native American, she's going to be working hard to try and get us this access to it. But you would think that with all the cruelties that have happened to the Native American people throughout American history, that if we have the ability to tell your story and to say, hey, your story is not just lore, it's accurate history.
Mhm.
Help us to explore it. But
And see,
sadly, we get pushback on it.
that's another thing. The Native Americans that I've talked to, and when I relay this information to them, they tend to start shaking their head like they agree with this. But these people with these elongated skulls, they don't line up with being part of some Native American tribe, but actually they line up with being the enemy of this Native American tribe or certain Native American tribes, because the Indian lore or the Native American lore tells stories about them warring against giants. And in some places they had to build special housing, like out in the Four Corners region, in order to hide from something. They were hiding from something, and their lore tells that they were hiding from cannibalistic giants. And these people ate people, and they feared them, and they had to set up ways to protect themselves. And some of the paths that lead to their houses in the cliffs, which is another reason why we have the bluff dweller culture. Some of these people were trying to get away from something, but some of these
And
paths that lead to the
there's
dwelling in the cliffside are so narrow that an average sized man can just barely squeeze through there, which would
That's
keep
right.
a giant sized man from coming in.
That's right. And some of the bluff shelter caves that we've been in, especially like in Oklahoma, are like that. I mean, it's a huge
Mhm.
area. It's extremely dangerous because they'll fall in. But in some of the caverns that we've gone into, some of the caves, there's areas where, I mean, I'm a pretty big guy, compared to the average man, and I can get in there. But once again, there's areas where some of the passages that we've been in were like, that wide, which I think would freak 99% of all people out, which is why we probably never do that type of a cave tour with people. But we can get into these areas, and then what do we find? Native American works of some kind, where they had the charcoal beds. We find charcoal in a lot of these places. And what is the charcoal? Why are we finding the charcoal?
Well, in that particular cave that you just mentioned, I'm surprised we found the charcoal that far back in the cave, which means that they either had really good fire building skills and they were able to make torches and stuff to illuminate their way all the way. It took us what? We had modern flashlights and good ones, and it took us 30 minutes to get back there, right? So if you were going with a torch, how would you get that far back? And how would you keep your fire going? Why is there charcoal back there? There's charcoal back there because that's where they were camped. We've got what would we say? We've got a climate or temperature issue here. When it's cold, you can get inside a cave and it's 52 degrees in this region. The farther north you go, it's colder. The farther south you go, it's warmer. It's the temperature of a cavern once you get about 600 feet in is it's usually the average temperature of the year is what the temperature of the cave will be once you get about 600 feet in. You pass through a thermocline. So these people leaving these charcoal remains in the back of these caverns were probably
They were living in that.
yeah, they were getting out of the temperature. It was either 105 degrees and they were getting in there because it's 52, or it's 17 degrees outside and they're getting in there because it's 52 degrees.
But in this one cave that we're talking about, we call this cave 2. What, 400 meters away is cave 1.
Mm-hmm.
And so we didn't find what we consider to be anything of gigantic stature in cave 2. But in cave 1, multiple different anomalies, is that a good word to use? Anomalies?
Yeah. Well, human remains.
I mean, there's two. It's a burial cave.
Yeah.
You have the
You got two
king
separate things going on here.
and the woman.
Cave
Yeah.
2, where the charcoal is a dwelling place, and cave 1 is a ceremonial or sacred place or a burial tomb. So that's two different, and I'm sure the locals back then had ways of knowing, okay, we don't sleep in here because this is burial. It was marked somehow, I'm sure. And we've seen, petroglyphs and stuff that
Well,
indicate something.
and I want to bring up something that cave 1 compared cave 2 is surface level.
Hmm.
Cave 1 is high up.
It's elevated.
It's a hike. I mean, it's a steep hike.
Mhm.
And once again, the burial place, the sacred place, is higher up. How many
Right.
times do we find that throughout antiquity? Right.
Yeah, and it's even in the Bible. Some of the Israelites were commanded to take down the altars on the high places, and in the groves. So so it's always been, Satan has always tried to mimic God. And you read biblical characters, they went up on top of the mountain to meet with God. Well, Satan wants to be worshiped like that. He wants his worshipers to be on the high place. In several instances throughout the Bible, whatever God wants is what Satan wants, because he says in certain places in the Bible,
He wants
blah
to be
blah blah
like
blah
the Most
blah,
High.
and then I will be like the Most High.
Yep.
So
Yeah,
so
Satan is a cheap imitation,
mhm.
right? And it always involves human sacrifice, blood, and then obviously things that are ungodly. With cave 1, it reminds me, could that have originally been a giant's dwelling cave because of how open it was? And I think
That's possibility.
the possible cannibalistic nature of the human remains that we had found leads me to believe maybe there's a reason why this was high up and open and left that way, and then cave 2 further down the road, and I mean, not probably 3 minutes down the road, those people were a quarter mile deep into the cave to
Right.
live in it, in an area that a giant cannot get into, or if a giant tries to get into it,
Mhm.
the giant then has to be into a bottleneck, which is not easily defendable for
Right.
anyone trying to come in, but it is easily defendable for anyone who's inside of it, right?
Mhm.
And because we were crawling up a pass, and we have the video of it if anybody wants to watch it. It's on both of our YouTube channels. And we're using the handholds that are hundreds, maybe thousands of years old to crawl up into this cave. This
Mhm.
isn't new. So,
Right.
we're going into an area that has been used for generations of people. And we know, with some of the lore of this area in Calf Creek, the giant lore, the cannibalistic giant lore is very popular. And even with some of the random local people that we met, they had the same thing to say about it. They're like,
Mhm.
oh, we were just in this cave where they had the 2 giants that were exhumed from it.
Right.
And then here comes a random guy up. Oh, yeah, I remember when I was a kid 50, 60 years ago, there's a cave over here, and there's a cave over here. Giant remains were found here. Giant remains were found here. This whole area seemed to have been highly populated. What do you think
Right.
about that?
Yeah, and it seems as if it was not only populated by Native Americans, but there's remnants of another culture that was there before that, and that's why we're interested in this area. I mean, I'm actually interested in Native American culture, but my main focus is to find what we call Nephilim sites, which is different. You've got lots of Native American cultures sites, but you don't have as many sites that have artifacts and such that lend themselves to be part of the Nephilim culture. And I want to bring this up at this point. The reason why we're able to explore these places that we're discussing here, and there's been several others, and there's more on our books that we haven't got to yet, is because it's on private property. And state and local laws are such that if it is on private property, and then we have the ability to come in and actually do an archaeological survey on that property. Stuff that's on national property and state property, we're restricted. So if any of you out there that are listening have property that you think that there's some archaeological significance to, and you would like for us to investigate it, we have a professional team. We have archaeologists, we have anthropologists, we have geologists on staff that we can call upon when we need to, and we can give you a professional assessment of what's on your property. So I just want to bring that up.
Yeah, we have a gentleman that's in Missouri right now who is in that process right now, which is let's bring up this. We only got about 10 minutes left.
Okay.
The area that's in Missouri, I know we talked about this recently when we were on Dave Hodges' intel report, but that's an area where they found megalithic stones,
right,
like what's down in South America,
in Peru,
where it's rectangular, and then there's a rectangular cutout in that part. How did these people, let's say if it was the native culture, how could they have made those types of incisions into that type of hard stone?
Yeah, I don't think they did. And I've shown that to some Native American people, and they're like, we didn't do that. You know, we didn't build like that. And it lends itself more to the technology that you see in South America. Like you said, you know, you believe that these people pushed up and mixed and mingled with the people in North America, which I believe also. And so
Well,
this looks like that. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I say why I think that real quick, just in case anyone questions it? It's more advanced structurally in the Peru area, and then it becomes more simplistic once it reaches Central America and then up into the jungles of Mexico. One of the largest pyramids of this kind that's in all of this hemisphere is found in Mexico, in the Maya region. And you know what it originally was before anyone discovered it? It was a big pyramidal mountain with trees all over it. And then about 100 years ago or so, an explorer went out there and found it. And it's like, this is a pyramid. We all thought it was just the lonely mountain out in the forest, but it is the only thing that's out there. And so I think this culture pushed up further and further, because there's a pyramid that was found in Georgia, and then there's stone walls, like you and I have never mentioned this, but there's stone wall structures all throughout your area, and then going eastward, stone wall structures.
Yeah, there's the East Coast has just got thousands and thousands of miles of unexplained stone walls, and those same type of walls are found that I discovered on the property they were getting ready to investigate. Same type, same height, same width. I mean, same thing going on, same technology. Some people say it's Celtic, some people say it's Viking. You know, we don't know exactly what it is, but we know that it was here prior to Columbus being here. So there's a different story going on than what we've been fed, you know. And I think, you know, this is not something that the Native Americans didn't build stone walls, you know. So there's another culture that has another purpose. Some of these people believe that, just for instance, in South Africa, there's a lot of round stone walls that are made out of a certain type of stone. And people said, well, that's where they had cattle and livestock, but there's no entrance or exit. There's no door. And then some people theorize that, and I'm going to tie this together, the pyramids have the same kind of quality as these stone circles, in that somehow or another they're emitting electricity. You can put a meter on this. We use a tri-field meter sometimes, but you can put certain meters on this and realize that this rock is conductive in a certain way. And a lot of times it's placed over a limestone aquifer, which the water flowing through the limestone aquifer, the friction of the water passing through the limestone generates an electrical current. And so it's emitted through this type of stone. Some people theorize that the pyramids once generated electricity. We know that they found what they call the Baghdad battery, which is a device that was probably used for electroplating jewelry. But it's old. It's real old. And so we know that the ancient cultures knew something about electricity. So why not, you know, why rule out the possibility that maybe there's something like that going on you know, because some of these stone walls make no sense. They don't enclose anything. They just start and stop abruptly. Sometimes they're lined up with astronomical bodies in the sky, but they really don't make a lot of sense. I mean, for instance, I found one that was about a mile long on top of a mountain in the middle of the Ozark National Forest, and it just starts at one point and stops at another point. It's just a straight line. It doesn't do anything, you know. I mean, why is it there? What's the purpose? So
Well,
so you got to open up
and
your
Civil
mind
War
to the
units
fact that
didn't build that.
I'm sorry.
And Civil War units didn't build that.
Right. I mean, you know, these skirmishes were fought on the run. They didn't stop generally, especially here. And I mean, in this region, it was a run and gun type battle. They didn't stop and build fortresses and shoot it out with each other. You know, it's kind of jump here, jump there kind of battle. So, you know, there's something else going on. So you got to open your mind to other possibilities, even the electrical theory.
Which one, you brought up the tri-field. It's the reason why every site that we go to, we bring the tri-field meters. You and I both have them, and we take a baseline reading. We make sure that we sanitize ourselves of any objects, and we take a baseline reading as we stand, and then put it on the ground to see if we have any different anomalous spikes in energy, and we go from radio frequency to voltage. And there was one place where we were out with your cousin, we were looking in an area that he said was where they had found a giant's remains whenever they were, children and playing in this area. That
Right.
was a Native American burial ground once again. And we found some strange anomalies with the tri-field meter. And you know what? I tried replicating it a couple different times, and it was just interesting because it was like if the signal moved, you could
Mhm.
never really hone in where the signal was. And I know that if you walk real fast with a tri-field meter, you're going to get an inaccurate reading. If you're spinning around with it like this, you're going to get an inaccurate reading. And
Mhm.
so, you and I did this. We would just stand there, and then all of a sudden, it would just start spiking and spiking. And at the Toltec Mounds, it
Mhm.
did the same thing. It started spiking, and then it would just go away.
Mhm.
And there's no power lines around us. No one has anything that's emitting electricity, anything more powerful than a cell phone. And typically, we're far enough away from it, and we have everything's on airplane mode. That way there can be no radio frequency interference. We're doing is everything that we can to sanitize the situation, because the problem with what we're doing is everybody, I don't want to say everybody else, a lot of people sensationalize everything. And hey man, it works. It'll get 200 and 300,000 watches on YouTube, and they'll make a lot of money off of it, and they'll keep repeating this because they make money off of you for it. We're actually in the field trying to get, this is the boring stuff, I guess you could say. We're actually trying to get samples of things that are going on, and occasionally there's something that's not normal. We would almost call it paranormal at times. So before we get off, we got about 5 minutes.
Okay.
Let's talk about the paranormal encounters within this area, and do we expect to see any more?
You said, do we expect to see any more? So I got to bring up what happened when we were in Cave 1. And I it's hard for me to say this, but I was I guess you would say I was almost a non-believer in stuff like that until recently when this happened. But we were in the cave, and we all distinctively heard something, and to me it sounded like a wolf, and somebody else said that sounds like a wolf howling. There's not any wolves in this area. Hasn't been for hundreds of years, maybe 150 years. And the funny thing is, or the strange thing is, the howl didn't come from outside where the cave entrance is. The howl
I
came
got
from within the
goosebumps
came.
already.
And so
Yeah,
we could we could point, and
came
we
on the
did in
other
the
side.
video. We were in the video. We weren't actually filming when it happened, but we turned our cameras on just after that, and we're all standing there with the hair standing up on the back of our neck, talking about what we just experienced. And I point to this hole, and I said, "This is where the sound came from," because you guys were in front of me. You guys were talking about the chief's grave that Billy had discovered, and I'm standing in the background filming it, and this noise comes from behind me, and I was wanting to get up there and huddle with you guys because I was like, what's going on behind me here, you know? And so and then we had the same kind of experience, and there's an instance in one of our video clips. Doug's a big old boy, look at those arms on him. But he was kind of spooked when he heard what he heard in this cave.
It was spooky. I'm not, and look, we're all Christians. There's some people in the comment section because of the logo behind me that's based off of my old time back in the military and law enforcement, but there's nothing satanic about what's behind me or Luciferian. But there is an element of, I don't want to say fear, but I mean, I got worried there for a second.
It just catches you off guard because it's like,
you don't expect to hear that in a cave.
Yeah. I mean, you feel like, we're a quarter mile back in the ground and it's total darkness, and you're there with 3 other guys, and then you hear another noise that didn't come from any one of us, and you're like, okay, what is that?
Okay, let me explain cave 2.
Okay.
All right, we go back into the waterfall area. And just for Billy's sake, he says, all right, turn the flashlights off and listen to how loud the waterfall is and how dark it is. Like, you cannot get more dark when you're a quarter mile deep into a cave. So me and Mondo and Billy turn all of our stuff off, and then we start to hear this whispering voice. And it's weird because you can't tell where it's at. So it's actually kind of frustrating to me because I'm like, I want to debunk it. All right, we're not out here with Ouija boards, like the Ghost Adventures guys. We're not out here tempting spirits and calling upon spirits to have a conversation with them. No, we're believers in Christ. We don't do necromancy. And once again, we're in the field as analysts. So we're trying to get actual information, right? We're not sensationalists, which maybe that's why we're a little dry and boring at times. But when we heard that, me and Mondo looked at each other, and he almost immediately, the same time, we said, did you hear that? And we're like, okay, we're going to ignore this, and we're going to go back, and we came back out to meet with you. And of course, because I'm the biggest one of the group, I'm the last guy to come out of the cave, and I'm in that area where I'm on my hands and knees, pitch black behind me. And I mean, it was hard for me to get into this area and to get out. And as I'm crawling out, I'm not even thinking about the voices that we just heard. And then all of a sudden, Mondo's filming me. And man, if I'm lying, I'm dying. I get goosebumps right now remembering this. I thought there was a man's voice behind me speaking. So much to the fact that, hey, Doug goes into caves with his pistol. I don't know what it might be in there, but it's going to have a 40 Smith & Wesson flying at it. All right. That's just the point of the matter. I was literally at the point to where as soon as I heard that, I chicken winged my gun immediately because I was like, oh my Lord, what's behind me? I'm just going to ignore it. I'm just going to keep coming out of this little tunnel, and I'm going to pretend nothing bad or mysterious or devilish is behind me. And you know what it makes me think is we're in an area where ancestral worship has been done. We're in an area where worshiping of strange gods has been done. Sacrifice has been done to it. Human sacrifice has been done. Cannibalism has been done. And also we're in an area where a giant chieftain is laying in an area where a giant woman was exhumed. And also the cavern, the other tunnel that's in there has decapitated human skulls in it that we're going to be filming soon. And so I'm sitting here going, of course we're hearing stuff. We're in a demonically charged area.
I've been doing this for going on 15 years. When I say doing this caving, I've been in the caving thing for about 15 years now. And I've actually been in both of those caves before by myself, solo. Never experienced anything like that in those two caves or any other caves that I've ever been in. And I don't know what happened there, but it caught me off guard. It made me nervous, and that's never happened. That's never happened to me before. So I don't know what element brought that on that day, but I wasn't, I was in shock.
Well,
For
I'm not. I,
I don't know
I'm
what
not.
I can't explain what actually happened.
No,
It just
I can't either. I don't think we caught anything on the equipment. It was so faint. It was so faint. It was just murmurings.
mhm.
I mean, like it was like a voice on the wind, right? That's the way me and Mondo described it, and it did kind of freak us out a little bit. Um, and I'm not spooked by it. Mondo's not spooked by it. You're not spooked by it. I mean, Mondo's a pastor, you know. We pray before we go into places like this, plead the blood of Jesus over us, and walk confidently where we're at, but we're not going to be spooked. We're not going to be scared off. We're going to find what's there. There's like taboo for some people, like, oh, I don't go to these places. Well, if we don't go there, we won't know what's there.
Right.
And we're out here for the biblical narrative. You have to sometimes get in a little bit dangerous spots.
Yep.
So, and there's a couple other paranormal like places that we're going to be hitting up as well, right?
Yeah, we mentioned the Missouri site. There's also, here in Arkansas, there's 3 places that I know of. I think Crossett, Arkansas, Gurdon, Arkansas, and Dover, Arkansas, where there's this light phenomenon that people encounter. It's like there's always some kind of story associated with it, but you go out and you sit on this railroad track, or you go up on this mountain and you look at this certain spot, and this orb will start glowing. Well, there's one of these things at this site in Missouri that we're gonna visit. So that's another part of, that's
Is that the same place where the rocks float?
Yeah, same place where the rocks with the rectangle cutouts are in it.
I'll be honest with you. I've watched a lot of videos of the floating rocks. I think half of it's fake.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna be, and once again, I
Oh,
go
wait,
into these
wait.
places
Did
as a
you say
skeptic.
floating rocks?
Yeah,
No,
well,
that's
I don't want to.
yeah, that's board camp. That's another
Yeah,
place in Arkansas. This place is in Missouri. This is where the I thought you said the rock with the rectangle cutout that we discussed
No,
earlier.
I know we're hitting that, but there's
Yeah.
another place that we're gonna hit that has is it special because of the crystal that's
Yeah,
found there
it's
so much?
they're kind of dubbing it kind of like a mini Skinwalker ranch, So there's it has something to do with the quartz crystal. There's anomalies there. There's been a lot of small plane crashes in that area. Some people say the quartz crystal affects the instruments in the plane. But anyway, we'll get to that spot eventually, hopefully.
Yeah, there's plenty of places for us to go, plenty of cool stuff for us to explore. We're not spooked by these places, I mean, some people would say that we're a little we need to use a little bit more caution, but I mean, we're going, a mile deep into a cave, so caution got left out there at the opening. What's the deepest you've been underground?
You talking about depth, like downward or inside a mountain or what? I've been
Yeah.
I've been a little over 400 feet deep, and I've probably been back in a cavern probably close to 2 miles. And there's some places up here that they say you can get lost in and never find your way out. I've heard of people going 5 miles into some of these caverns. I know one guy that explored a cavern. He was in the cavern, he found an upper chamber, and he went up into the upper chamber and claims he went 6 miles back in this upper chamber. So I've been about 400 or 500 feet deep, and I've been a couple miles in.
Yeah, and people don't understand, a couple miles into a cave is not flat foot walking.
Yeah, and it's
very rigorous.
It's and like we talked about the total darkness aspect of this. If you don't have proper lighting and you don't have enough lights or enough batteries or whatever, you're not coming out.
No, man, you're
You're not going to
scared.
find your way out because you have no way of knowing. It's like you don't know which end is up. I mean, it's like your only chance would be to walk until you find a wall and keep your hand on that wall and keep walking. And maybe you might come out to a place, but you might go farther back in too. So lighting is a real big thing. When we go in, we've got 7 or 8 lights and backup batteries for all of these lights. I mean,
And people know where we're at, what time
Right.
we're coming in, and about what time we should be coming
yeah,
out
other
as well.
cavers, we contact them and let them know what we're doing, where we're at, and how long we expect to be there.
With the Mammoth Caves in Kentucky,
Hmm
there's a lot of lore over that. I would love to get into that system. Do you have anything like that within your area that's that vast?
Yeah, and matter of fact, probably not this trip, but the next trip when you and Mondo come out, I want to take you guys to a commercial cave that we can walk a few miles in. It's all lighted, has walkways, has lights shining on the formations, handrails, the whole 9 yards. But I just want to show you the vastness of this cavern. I mean, there's places in there where the ceiling is 100 feet high, and
I mean, we're small cities of people can
Mhm.
dwell into.
Matter of
And once
fact-
again, that's why we talk about caves as dwelling places. I mean, some of these areas you can put tribes of people into.
Mhm.
Not
Matter of fact, if
hard.
anybody's in this area, if you want to go into a really cool cavern without going to Carlsbad or Luray Caverns in Virginia or something, you're in Arkansas in the Ozark Mountains, look up Mountain View, Arkansas, and go to Blanchard Springs Caverns. You'll be glad you did.
Yeah, that's right. And there's gonna be a lot more going on. We're gonna have some new episodes of the Paleo Research Group coming out here soon. Like I said, we got a new site that we're exploring with some, fairly credible guys, L.A. Marzulli and Tim Alberino. So, hopefully we can bring a little bit of legitimacy to them. And it's a lot of fun hanging out with these guys and being able to do this. But, the hardest thing about what we do is that we do the solid grunt work of finding these places, and sometimes we don't find anything, but the trip is enjoyable.
Yeah.
It's cool to hang out, and fellowship, and to be able to get deep into the earth. I mean, I enjoy it. You got me hooked on caving, Brent.
Hey, I've got some of the people that follow us that they're just itching to hang out and have that fellowship. And I just want to let you guys know, probably in the spring, maybe a fall trip, we're planning some kind of trip where we can invite some of you guys to come along with us. So hopefully we can get together and share some stories around the campfire and have some fellowship.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be a lot of fun. We'll keep everybody updated on that. Well, Brent, thanks for coming and talking with us. We
Thanks
need to
for having
continue
me.
these talks. Yeah, man. There's so much more to learn about what's going on underground. We just got to get in there. We got to get the films. And guys, we're in there with GoPros and flashlights and our cell phones and crawling on hands and knees. Sometimes face is literally on the ground, and the top of your head is on the roof of the cave at times. But we do it because we love it. But just make sure if you do anything caving related, that you are extremely careful. If you don't know what you're doing, don't go do it, because
Right.
you may not come out of it.
Yeah, we need to include a link to a couple of our caving videos in the description.
Absolutely,
video.
we will. We will. Well, Brent, thanks for coming on, man. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening. My name is Doug Thornton. This is Brent Hyde of Brent Hyde Outdoors. Please go and subscribe to his YouTube channel. See some of the other cool stuff that Brent has on, and stay tuned for some of the next episodes. Should be coming out here, a couple weeks from now, maybe a month from now. We'll have some more very unusual things to show you. Hopefully some of them are very unusual. So Brent, thanks for coming on, man, and
I enjoyed
I'll
it.
call you tomorrow.
All right.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
As long as I don't lose my gun. Just in case there's something taller than bigger than me.